Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. We're letting people in. Hope everybody's had a nice week. Our guest today is Judge/Dean Bill Koch, who is now officially the Dean of the Nashville School of Law. Welcome, Bill. We're so glad that you're here. How are you doing this morning?
Doing great, and thanks for inviting me, Jim. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. And I know you're much more properly dressed than the rest of us. I know you have a funeral that you have to attend after, but we really are glad you're here. It's a beautiful day. I think it's going to be, what, 110 degrees outside today?
I'm hoping it is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. Do you mind coming up? Do you think you have time maybe later today to come over and mow my yard? Because I don't want to go out in that heat.
I can fit you in about 2.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
I got to do Paul Summers' yard first.
You got to do Paul Summers' yard? Well, I'm sure he's got acre after acre of land down somewhere in West Tennessee that probably would take several days to mow. Yeah. But you can work that out with Paul Summers. I know he's on this call. So while we're waiting for everybody to kind of get on, I was looking at the picture it looks over your desk. What is that?
Well, that is actually a lithograph done by a botanist who was on Captain Cook's ship when he discovered the Hawaiian Islands.
Wow.
That's where I was born and raised. They've got I've got some lithographs of Hawaiians, Hawaiian dwellings, Hawaiian war canoes. So that's what that is. A lot of people think it's a Civil War thing, but it's not quite that.
Very interesting. So you were born in Hawaii?
Yeah. Born and raised.
Well, I didn't know that. I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to kind of tell us a little bit about it, how you got to Nashville, but I didn't know that. Very interesting. So do you collect things from Hawaii? Do you have like I collect all kinds of different things, none of it which is really tied together. But obviously, being from Hawaii, do you collect some things from Hawaii?
I do. And actually, my wife puts up with it in pretty good humor. We've got a lot of paintings from Hawaii. We have a beautiful old Hawaiian quilt. It was very unique. We've got a bunch of Hawaiian stuff. It is bad luck to take sand, lava, or rock off the islands. It curses you if you do that. So I don't have any pieces of Hawaii, but I do have some representations of it.
All right, so that's good to know. I have never been to Hawaii, but I have had friends go to places where I thought I would probably never go, which is like Saudi Arabia and other places, and they brought back a little vial of sand for me. But if I ever go to Hawaii, I won't take anything off the island.
Well, yeah, Madam Pelly would not be happy with you.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. I'm going to write that down. Well, it is about 10:03. We're going to get started. We're going to start talking about Hawaii in just a second. But Bill Koch is our guest. He is now the Dean of the Nashville School of Law. He's a former Supreme Court justice and in Tennessee. We have a couple of distinguished guests on. Aisha Miles is on. She is a candidate for a chancellor's position in Davidson County. Welcome, Aisha. And former Attorney General Paul Summers is on. And he's muted, and I can't see him. He may be out on his mower because once we start talking about it, he may have already gotten a head start on. He is unmuted. General Summers, you're recognized.
I am. Thank you very much. I'm unmuted, and I appreciate you saying that. I am at my place here in Benton County, Tennessee, but I want to remind Justice and Dean Koch how much I appreciate him for the last 40 years. I always call him on January the 5th of every year because that's the day I met him at the state capitol.
That is so moving, and I'm so appreciative. You never called me on the day we met. I guess that wasn't that important then.
Well, there was more that happened that day.
Okay, well maybe that's a whole nother explanation. General, are you going to be working in the fields today, this afternoon?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to be working in the fields. I'm going to be getting out my lawnmower here after this phone call, but I appreciate being invited. I appreciate Bill Koch being there, and I appreciate your sponsoring this every week. This is great. Thank you very much.
Well, certainly. We're glad you're on. Well, Dean, Judge, Bill, the first question that we always ask to all our guests is tell us a little bit about yourself. Honestly, I had no idea you were born in Hawaii, but how did you get from Hawaii to becoming a Supreme Court judge in Tennessee and also now the dean of the law school?
Well, the short answer is I made a wrong turn in California in about 1965.
But you did end up in California. I assume you drove from Hawaii to California and then figured out where to go.
Well, actually, when I went to undergraduate school in New England, I actually had classmates that thought there was a bridge between California and Hawaii.
Yeah.
They also asked me if we used American money and had indoor toilets. So,
well, that was back, a while back. So
yeah, it was. My grandfather actually went out to the islands in the early 1900s, took my father with him and left the rest of the family back in Pennsylvania. Never returned, really. And, my dad and my mother were war brides during the Second War, wedding during the Second World War. And my mother was on the first ship of civilians allowed back into the islands after the armistice in the Pacific. And I came along a couple of years later, had a wonderful idyllic childhood in the islands. They decided they wanted me to learn how to wear shoes and eat with a knife and fork. So they sent me to boarding school on the Big Island of Hawaii. And then back then the idea was you send your son back to the mainland for college. And so my class we had 47 folks in my class, and most of us ended up on the East Coast, and I survived 4 winters in Connecticut and decided that I really wanted to get back to the islands, but I needed something to do. So I decided to go to law school. I had never been in the South before. I had no connection with the South. I had spent my senior year reading every word that William Faulkner had ever written. And it sounded like such a layered, interesting place. So I said, well, I'll just go to law school in the South, and then I'll go back to Hawaii and practice law. And so I applied to all my law schools were south of the Mason-Dixon line. And it got boiled down to University of Virginia, Duke, and Vanderbilt. And I just liked Vanderbilt. So I landed in Vanderbilt with no intent of staying. As a matter of fact, when my graduation from law school came up, the surf was pretty good in Hawaii. So I didn't go to graduation. I flew home to surf before I had to start studying for the bar. But the Attorney General at the time, David Pack, had offered me a job. So I figured I'd do that for a couple of years and then go back to Hawaii. And 43 years later, I was still working for the state. So it's serendipity. That's how I got there.
Very interesting. So, so how was the surfing when you when you skipped graduation from law school?
Awesome.
Yeah. And did you ever pick up your hood?
I never did.
Oh, okay.
Of course, the problem is I never paid for it. So.
Okay, well, maybe that's why they didn't give it to you. It wasn't going to work. So you came back and you worked for the Attorney General's office, and then you had a very distinguished career. I think you ended up being a commissioner maybe under Lamar Alexander. Is that right?
Yeah, I had not. The Attorney General's office has always been apolitical, and so we had avoided trying to be active publicly one way or the other in political campaigns. And after Governor Alexander lost his first election in '74, he was practicing at a firm called Dearborn and Ewing in town with the likes of Lou Connors and several other noted lawyers. And they decided that it would be good fun to start suing the state for various things. And with the luck of the draw, I ended up representing the state. And so I met Alexander in court. That's really the only way that I knew him. But after he won the election in '78, the Attorney General, Bill Leach at the time, called me one day and said, "Have you received a call from Alexander?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, if he calls you, you really ought to talk to him." And I said, "Well, if he calls me, I'll certainly talk to the governor-elect." And he sure enough called, and he said, "I'd like to offer you a job." And so I went out and talked to him, and he said, I want you to be my legal advisor. And I said, well, I'm really not much into politics. And he said, I'm not looking for a political advisor. I'm looking for a legal advisor. And I said, well, I'm going to have to think about that because I really like doing what I'm doing. And so I get back to the office. This is obviously before cell phones. And I call one of my mentors, one of my dearest friends in the world, Bill Willis, that many folks in Nashville know. And I call Bill, and I can quote him. I remember him yelling on the other end of the phone, "You fool. When a governor asks you to do something, you say yes, hang up and call him right back." So I hung up the phone, called Governor Alexander right back and said, well, yes, I would be happy to do that. And then, of course, what intervened there, as you remember, Jim, is that Governor Alexander got sworn in early. So Hal Hardin and Hayes Cooney and Bill Leach and I were part of that conspiracy. Governor Alexander took office, and a month later, oh, by the way, the night of Alexander's swearing in is the first time I ever met Debbie Patterson, who's now been my better half for about 27 years.
How did you meet Debbie that evening?
Well,
can you tell us that without violating anything?
I can. Debbie was Lamar's press secretary in his campaign, and we had been engaged in this secret arrangement where everybody was going to meet at the Supreme Court building to swear him in early at 5 o'clock on that afternoon. And it was down in the basement underground parking lot of the Supreme Court when Alexander came in the back door. Debbie was with him. And that's the first time I met her. And she was not particularly impressed with me. So we just kind of moved on. But then anyway, he gets sworn in, he starts in office, and he calls me out to the residence about a month later. And he says, well, I'm got 2 more cabinet positions to fill, and I wanted to talk to you about that. And so I said, sure. And he said, I want you to be commissioner of personnel. And I said, well, I'm doing this legal advisor stuff. And he said, well, you can do both. And I said, well, I'm really not a HR expert. We can find somebody like that. And he says, no, I think you'll be fine. So, of course, I said, well, I have to think about that. And I called Willis again. And Willis says, didn't you hear me the first time around? So, of course, I get back with the governor and say, well, of course. So I was commissioner of personnel for a couple of years. And then Tom Hall was appointed to the federal bench. And so I moved back up to the Capitol to be counsel.
Very interesting. So for those people who maybe are not familiar with that very historic evening, can you give this is when Governor Alexander was sworn in early. Brief scenario of what was going on and kind of how the decision was made. I know there's books on it now. I know Kill Hunt wrote a book about it. Kind of what was going on, and what was it like to be a part of what really was, I mean, you were making history and being a part of history at the same time.
Well, back at that time, Governor Blanton had won the Democratic primary with 23% of the vote. He did much better in the general. But then after he got into office, he basically started burning every political bridge he had. He also had a difficult time with drinking, and that was complicating things as well. And as his administration went on and people got less enchanted with him, he got more combative about it. And one of the issues he got in hot water about was the pardon or his promise to pardon a prisoner named Roger Humphreys, who was a friend of a political ally who had killed his former wife and boyfriend. And
you know where that was, don't you?
Yeah, up in Kingsport.
No, it's in Johnson City. Which is where I'm from, and I know some of the people from that situation.
Yeah, well, and so he was supposed to be doing about 30 years in prison, and he was actually given trustee status, a state car, and he was a state photographer. which was not known until Lee Smith stumbled across him in Ned Ray McWhirter's office one day, and that kind of was the beginning of the end. But Governor Blanton was very defensive about that, but then the other thing that happened is right on toward the end of his term, Governor Blanton released 52 folks from prison. He pardoned them late one Monday night. And that created a big furor. And actually what had been going on at the time was that there was a clemency for cash investigation by the FBI that had snared Governor Blanton's lawyer and several other of his employees. And after he pardoned these 52 folks, there was a concern that he was getting ready to pardon some more. So acting on his own and with a whole lot of political courage, when you think about it, Hal Hardin, who was the U.S. attorney at the time, called Governor-elect Alexander and said, you need to, the only way that we can stop him from signing more pardons was for you to take the oath early. And Alexander just said, I'm not going to do that. That's not how we operate in this country. And Hal tried to explain to him that they had reliable information that if more pardons were signed, a number of those pardons had been bought. So Governor Alexander just basically said, you're going to have to talk to Lieutenant Governor Wilder and to the Speaker of the House, Ned Ray McWhirter. So Hal gets on the phone with them and says the same thing. And they say, look, the Attorney General has written two opinions. One says the governor can be sworn in early. The other opinion says maybe he can, maybe he can't. And so the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor says, we're not doing anything until the Attorney General plants his flag one way or the other. And that's when Hardin calls Leach and they decide that they need to have a secret summit conference about this. And so Leach had an apartment or had a hotel room rented at the old Sheraton that is now, I think, a Hilton down on Broadway across the street from the Frist Art Center. And he said, we'll all meet in your room. So Hardin sneaks out and gets over there. Leach comes over there. Hayes Cooney, who was the Chief Deputy Attorney General, and I, the four of us are in the room, and we're just said, we've got to sort this out one way or the other. And after, I'd say an hour and a half, 2 hours or so of yelling and talking and figuring out, we found the consensus was that the opinion that said that the governor could be sworn in early was correct and was consistent with existing law. And so that got communicated to Governor-elect Alexander and to Speaker Wilder and Speaker McWhirter. And when they heard that, Wilder and McWhirter said, well, we will support the governor getting sworn in early. And when that was communicated to Alexander, he said, well, he appreciated that, but he was not doing it by himself, that if this was going to happen, McWhirter and Wilder needed to be there. And so they agreed to be there. And then he said, well, where are we going to do it? And so they decided, why don't we get the Supreme Court building? That would add legitimacy to it. And then the question was, well, who's going to give him the oath? And at that time, the Chief Justice was Joe Henry, just a wonderful lawyer and judge from Pulaski. And he had some heart problems and was recovering down at I think he had rented a room down in an apartment on James Robertson Parkway. And so I got dispatched to go over to talk to Joe Henry, and I told him what was going on. And his first reaction was, he said, I'm not going to do that. And so I just had to say, well, you know, Chief Justice, if you don't, somebody else will. And he said, well, I think I might be able to do that.
Yeah, I got it.
So he gets dressed, comes over. And again, this is before cell phones, you know, everything was hush hush. And we all got together in the robing room at the Supreme Court, went through who was going to say what, and where everybody was going to stand. And as they're walking out to actually do the oath, somebody says, well, you think we ought to call Governor Blanton? It would be polite to just tell him what's going on. And everybody says, yeah, that's probably right. There's not much he can do about it now. There was some concern that he would call out the National Guard or get the troopers over there. So then they're looking around, who is going to call the governor to give him this news? And everybody ends up looking at Ned Ray McWhorter and says, well, you know, you've got the best relationship with him, you do it. So McWhorter turns to his faithful sidekick, Jim Kennedy, and says, Jim, you got the governor's number. And of course, Jim has got his back then it was a black book. He didn't have a, you know, BlackBerry. And he goes through, he says, yes, I've got his number. So he says, well, call him. So they're on this big dial phone, old phone in the robing room. Kennedy dials the number, starts ringing, hands the phone to McWhorter. McWhorter, you could hear it through the phone. Ms. Blanton gets on, and Speaker McWhorter says, Ms. Blanton, this is Ned Ray. Is the governor free? And she says, well, yes, I'll get him. Hold on. And so Ned Ray's holding the phone, waiting for the governor to get on. You hear the governor say hello. And then McWhorter says, Governor, this is Ned Ray McWhorter. Bill Leach has something to tell you. And hands the phone to Leach. And we all walk out then for the swearing in, and Leach is left to tell the governor what's going on.
Governor McWhorter,
Yep.
one of the most astute politicians I've ever met. So the swearing in then took place. Obviously, there's famous pictures that were taken of the swearing in. And
well, I'll tell you that night, just coincidentally, was the first night that Channel 5 had a remote truck that could broadcast live. That was the first night that truck was operational. And so they were there in the courtroom, and we've got about 42 minutes of their film from that night. You know, we've even got Chris Clark on the break saying, can they do this? Is this legal? Somebody tell me what's going on. And then they'd go back live. So, you know, that's been preserved. So, you know, and it's available. People can actually watch Alexander get sworn in early. But the best comment of that night, and you're talking about Ned Ray McWhorter, is that at the end of the evening, the last interview that Hank Allison, who was the reporter, did was with Ned Ray McWhorter. And he sticks his microphone in Ned Ray's face and says, well, Mr. Speaker, it's not lost on me that most of the people here are Democrats, and you've just sworn in a Republican. What do you have to say about that? And McWhorter gives him a non-answer answer. And you know, politicians are very good at not answering questions. And Allison, I got to give him credit. Allison says, well, that's a good answer, Mr. Speaker, but you finesse my question. And McWhorter says, well, ask your question again. So Allison says, you know, I can't help but notice that most of the people here are Democrats. You just swore in a Republican. And McWhorter interrupted. He said, wait a minute. He said, I think I'm a Tennessean first, and this is the best for Tennessee regardless of the party. And that's really what the tone was for the rest of that administration, for Lamar's administration, McWhorter's administration. I'm a Tennessean first, and I'm going to do what's best regardless of the party.
But we seem to have come a long way since then. Maybe we should make everybody watch that and remember that even in politics, sometimes people do what they're supposed to do. And I think what Governor McWhorter was saying was that sometimes you forget party lines and you do what's best for the citizens of the state of Tennessee. And
there was no tougher Republican or Democrat than Ned Ray McWhorter.
Yes, I know that. I had the pleasure of serving initially when I first came to state government under his administration. He was something I will tell you that this gets off subject just a little bit, but when he entered a room, you knew greatness was coming. I mean, there was something about that gentleman that when he would come in for the State of the State addresses, you knew something special was going to happen. It was really truly amazing. He was one of a kind. Very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that story. Okay, so you ended up on the Supreme Court. You left Governor Alexander's. You were legal counsel, and then did he put you on the bench at that point?
Before the race, I guess it was '86. Mm-hmm. Lou Conner had been on the Court of Appeals, and Lou decided he was going to run for governor. This is before Winfield Dunn decided to get in. And so Lou calls me one day and says, well, you really ought to apply for the Court of Appeals job. And I said, well, I don't really want to be a judge. I'm doing what I like to do. I want to practice. I want to go back to practice law at some point. But long story short, I ended up taking Lou's advice. There was a screening process back then. I went through that. And surprisingly enough, my boss, the governor, appointed me to the Court of Appeals, and I stayed there for 23 years. And then during Phil Bredesen's administration, a vacancy came open on the Supreme Court. And the first time around, Connie Clark and I were the finalists, and she was a good, dear friend of mine. And Bredesen appointed her, and I thought that was great. Matter of fact, they swore in within about 2 hours after they announced it, and I went over to cheer her on. She's a good choice. And then a year or so later, another vacancy came up, and that, unfortunately, there was some litigation about that. Governor Bredesen thought the selection commission was playing fast and loose with him. And so I was one of the bologna in that sandwich. And when all that dust settled, then they sent him a list of 3 names. I was on it. And when I went over to interview with the governor, the first thing the Governor Bredesen asked me, which to this day, it just stuns me. He says, did I see you at Connie Clark swearing in? And I said, yeah, Connie's a good friend. She's a good judge. And he said, well, I really don't have much more I want to talk to you about. And then
was that enough? That was it?
Well, he didn't offer me the job then. He interviewed everybody. And then he said, well, I'm going to announce my decision in a couple of weeks. And having been on the other side of this, the drill is that the governor calls to give the winner the good news, and the governor's lawyer calls the other 2. So the first time around, Bob Cooper had called me to say, you're not getting it, Connie's getting it. And so we know the date he's going to announce it was going to be like on a Thursday. And I'm in my office. They're having a judicial conference and a bar conference out at the Sheraton at the same time. I don't want to be out there to get the bad news. So I'm just in my office, minding my own business. And of course, the call comes in, and my longtime partner in crime, Susan Doolin, comes in and says, the governor's on the phone. So I said, well, that's, thumbs up. That's looking a little. Well, yeah. He calls and he says, I want to offer you the job. And I'm very grateful. And I say, yes. And he says, now you can't tell anybody about this right now. We'll release it. I said, look, I know the drill. I'm not going to call anybody except my wife. And he says, well, you can call her. And so I'm sitting there shutting up. Of course, what happens is the other 2 candidates got calls on their cell phones. They're out at the convention. And so it doesn't take a lot of arithmetic to figure out if the 2 people out there didn't get it, there was only 1 left. And so I get a call from a lawyer friend of mine, and he says, well, we're out here at the coffee urn. It's breaking the CLEs out here. And I just thought you'd like to hear a snippet of what the conversation is out at the coffee urn. I said, yeah, what's going on? And he says, well, one lawyer says, I can't believe that Bredesen would appoint that damn Republican to the Supreme Court. And the other lawyer says, well, he ain't much of a Republican.
And that seemed to work, right?
Yeah.
Did you, so you served 23 years on the Court of Appeals and 8 years as the Supreme Court Justice. So I would guess, even though you initially said, I like doing this other stuff, did you enjoy your time on the bench? I mean, that's a long time to serve.
I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things where I admire people who have their careers planned out and can execute on that plan. I'd have to say that my career is more the result of serendipity than anything else. And it's one of those things where if I'm doing something that I like, I tried to do the best I can. And then if opportunities came up, I tried to have enough courage to get out of my comfort zone and say yes, although several times it took Bill Willis to remind me about that. But no, I wouldn't trade that time on the bench for anything.
So interesting. So now you're the dean of the Nashville School of Law. How did that happen? And what do you think about doing that? That's a very interesting role.
Well, and again, you're going to find is that sometimes I need to get hit over the head with a 2x4, and this is another example of that. I started teaching at the school in about 1997. It was Clay Bailey used to teach con law out here, and he wanted to retire. So Joe Loser, the dean at the time, asked me if I'd do it, and I said, "Yeah, I loved it. Just like the rest of the faculty, I'd come out at night, teach my course, go home, and had great students and enjoyed doing that." And I guess it was around 2003 when Joe Loser decides he wants to retire. The prospect came up about doing the school, and I at that point, I was next in line to be Chief Justice. I really enjoyed being on the court. It wasn't broke. I didn't need to fix it. And so I told the board, that's a really great idea, but maybe this isn't the best time. You need a younger person. I'll help you find someone, but, I think it's just not, the timing's not right. And they came back a little bit later and said, well, if you were doing a long range plan, we know you're not going to do it, but where do you see the school going? So I talked about that some. And then they said, well, we'd like you to rethink this, your decision. And so I went home to my dear wife. We're having dinner one night, and I said, I've told them as politely as I can that this probably is not going to work, that I'll help them find a good dean, but I just don't think it's me. And she looked at me and she said, you need to understand that you act differently when you talk about that school. So she says, you really do need to rethink your decision. And Debbie was exactly right. With a little reflection, what I realized is that this school is really important. It is important to the students. It's important to the community. We travel under the radar a little bit more than we should. Our story is a great story. And I figured what would be better to do than help folks who want to become lawyers fulfill their dreams. So I retired from the Supreme Court on a Friday and showed up here working on a Monday.
You just never stop. Fortunately, you've had very good advice over the years.
Absolutely.
That have helped you get to the right thing. So tell people who are watching, for people who have no idea how the Nashville School of Law works. I mean, I remember when it used to be called the Night Law School. I mean, you go back a long time. Tell people what they should know about the Nashville School of Law.
Well, here's a quick historical drill. Our school got started in 1911. Back at that time, between the late 1890s and 1920, the YMCA started over 20 law schools around the country. We were one of them. We were founded by 4 graduates of Vanderbilt Law School who thought that there needed to be socioeconomic diversity at the bar and that there ought to be an opportunity for working men and women to get a law degree. So they started, as you said, it was called the YMCA Night Law School. It then got changed to the Nashville YMCA Night Law School. And in fact, they fulfilled that. That's what we've been doing since 1911. We've been giving working men and women an opportunity to get a legal education at night. Joe Loser was a dean for 28 years, and I succeeded him. But during his time, we literally moved from the basement of the YMCA downtown on 7th Avenue to a place on Sidco Drive to the facility we're in today over at 100 Oaks. So, a great facility. We have always been not-for-profit. for the first several years, our degrees were awarded at Cumberland University down in Lebanon. They had a law school back at that time. But we've been freestanding essentially since about 2014. We still cater mostly to working men and women. Most of them are married. Most of them are working, but they've all had this dream of being a lawyer. And they've realized that because they've lived their lives and they have work commitments and family commitments, that they just can't quit their job and go to law school full time. So this is a wonderful opportunity for them to do that. And, last week we graduated 82 students. We had over 1,200 people in the audience when we did it. It was their family, their friends, their employers. The tenacity and focus that these students have is unique, because this isn't plan B, this is plan A. This is what they've always wanted to do. And our job is to give them a place where they can remake themselves. And that to me is the wonderful thing about this. We watch people who have a dream, who are willing to work hard, and believe me, it's hard work. And at the end of the day, when they get their law license, they become contributing members of the bench and bar. And Jim, you know a bunch of them. We're all over the place. We're a small little school, but we've got more judges on state and federal benches than any other law school in the state. We've got graduates on the Metro Council. We've had graduates who have been the chief of police of Nashville. We have the graduate who was the director of law of Nashville. Senator Albert Gore Sr. is one of our graduates. U.S. Senator Harlan Matthews is one of our graduates. One of our graduates, Ross Dyer, was the Chief Justice of the Tennessee Supreme Court. So we are a place where if people are willing to pursue their dream of being a lawyer, we can accommodate, and we do.
So let me ask you a couple of questions of people who are, who have known about the school for a long time, probably don't know about the historical nature of the significant number of graduates that come from there. The restrictions on going to the National School of Law, if you graduate, you pass the bar, you're allowed to practice in the state of Tennessee. Are you allowed to practice outside of the state?
Well, and that's a good question. Well, our board has purposely not sought American Bar Association accreditation. That accreditation makes the degree much more transportable. Mm-hmm. But we haven't done it primarily because the cost to get our program accredited, and again, the deans at Vanderbilt and UT have certified that our curriculum is the functional equivalent of an AB accredited school. But to meet all those other accreditation requirements would force us to almost double our tuition. And that is inconsistent with our mission of giving working men and women a chance to go to law school. So right now, the Tennessee Supreme Court, through the Board of Law Examiners, has approved us so our graduates can take the bar in Tennessee. We have also got approval of the Kentucky Supreme Court. Our graduates can take the bar in Kentucky. As a matter of fact, we're getting more and more students driving down I-24 to get their education here because we're much more convenient to a large part of Kentucky than the law schools in Kentucky are. We have graduates who have now been permitted to take the Alabama bar and the Georgia bar. So part of my job is to try to break some of those geographical barriers down. But at the same time, most states, after 5 years, have a process where a lawyer in good standing can be admitted by reciprocity to their state. And so, for example, I know a name that's going to be familiar to you and a lot of other people, Adam Dredds, one of our graduates. Adam is admitted to practice in Massachusetts. So he's up there on Cape Cod doing his thing. We've got lawyers in Kansas City. We've got lawyers in Texas. We've got lawyers in California. So our graduates spread out, but our primary focus is Tennessee, and a vast majority of our graduates are from here. They have family roots here. They're not looking to go to the bright lights in the big city, so they stay in Tennessee.
So would it be fair to say that specifically because of the Tennessee connection and maybe the Kentucky, is there a lot more focus, and it may be that you answered based upon the faculty, but a lot more focus on really being prepared to practice, to go right into practice in Tennessee?
Oh, absolutely. Now, the bar exam requires a student to know a lot more than Tennessee law. And
right.
Tennessee is one of the 32 or so states that use what we call the uniform bar exam. So we've got to focus on the big picture, but we offer courses specifically on Tennessee law. We focus, while academics is important, we also have a very strong focus on practice skills. So, for example, this spring, we'll have a course in what we call dispositive motions, motions to dismiss, motions for summary judgment. That's more important to civil practitioners than selecting juries because there are very few jury trials. That's going to be taught by Chancellor Pat Moskal, who does that every day. And she is one of many members of our faculty who are judges who practice in Tennessee courts every day. Others are lawyers who practice in Tennessee courts every day. Judge Steve Dozier teaches evidence, so his students are getting a strong dose of how evidence law is applied in Tennessee. And so there is intentionally a strong emphasis on how it works here and how to do it.
So I'm thinking that I should have gone there years ago.
There's still time.
And there's still time. Well, I mean, I have my law degree, but I assume I can still come back and get a second law degree. Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, so tell me about the tuition. So if people are watching this and going like, okay, I don't know much about it. Generally, what's the tuition, and how many people apply each year to get in? And does everybody get in, or do you have to meet certain requirements to be able to get into the school?
I'll get to the how do you get in first, and then we'll talk about tuition.
Okay.
Not everybody that applies that gets in.
Okay.
We have I wouldn't say stringent, but we have some fairly firm admission criteria. And that includes their undergraduate success, any other postgraduate degrees that they've had, success that they've had in business. We want to look at that. We also use the LSAT. There's some dispute going on now, LSAT versus GRE. And we can talk about that if you want to. But we don't use the LSAT as a cutoff like many schools do. It's just one factor we look at. We get 145, 150 applications a year. We'll admit 90 or 95. So we in the admission process, we try to figure out if somebody is going to have a good chance to be successful at doing our work and then be successful in passing the bar. Because we don't think it's fair just to admit somebody who does not have the possibility of success. That's just kind of taking their money. And we're not one of these fly-by-night trade schools that's in it for the money. Right. So we're somewhat selective about that. Our deadline for applications right now is next week, and we've already admitted about 85 students. We've got some really great ones that are finishing up their application process. So we'll probably have a first-year class beginning in August of 2022 of somewhere around 100, 110 students. Now, the attrition rate will winnow that down by the time it gets to graduation. but that's something that we plan on. So, and the mix is really fascinating. Most of them work. Most of them are married. We want to, when we can, admit veterans, and we do operate the VA program out here. That's the only federal funding that we operate. We'll have a number of them this year. We've got one wonderful special services officer that's retiring up in Fort Campbell that's coming down here. I'm really looking forward to having him here. So our admissions process is rigorous. The thing I look at most than anything else is that a lot of our folks were in undergraduate school 15, 20 years ago or more. And what I know from my own personal experience is that when you're in undergraduate school, sometimes you're having more of a good time than learning anything. So GPAs tell you something, but if somebody's been successful in business, if they've operated their own business, if they've gone back and got an advanced degree in another field, if they've demonstrated an ability to focus and become good at something, like musicians, we got a bunch of music row people out here. Well, one of our grads is Charlie Sizemore. He's a great bluegrass player up in Kentucky. He toured all during his law school experience here. Well, if Charlie has the focus to learn how to play the bluegrass guitar, he can be a lawyer. So we look at the experience too. And I would say that there's no question that we give chances to people that other law schools wouldn't take the risk of taking. And we watch them succeed. Now, in terms of the cost, we books and tuition all rolled in together, somewhere around $9,000 a year. Most of our students pay as they go. They pay every month, and so they graduate with no debt, which is really fairly astounding because the average debt of law school students graduating today is around $145,000.
Right.
And that's on top of whatever undergraduate debt they've got. So our graduates graduate with no debt, which gives them much more flexibility and freedom than what their career choice is going to be, because they're not looking at those student loans that they have to repay.
That's true. That's very awesome. Yeah, that's good.
Oh, it's cool. Our tuition, the total cost of our degree, going for 4 years, everything in, is around $36,000. That would pay for one semester at Vanderbilt, my alma mater. That would pay for about a half a year at Belmont. It's 50% less than UT and Memphis. So we have a real strong value proposition out here where students can get what we think is a very serviceable, good legal education and not have to pay the price for it.
I think that's amazing. And I know many of the people who, like you said, have graduated from the school and are fabulous lawyers. I mean, or they've done something with the law that is just great. Yep. And I think the reputation of the school gets stronger every year, because I think people understand that it takes 4 years to go through, but people do it. They do it in the evening because they really want to understand and they really want to become lawyers. And I know a number of them all over. They're in different firms all across the city. And I know a number of them who are judges as well.
Well, we've got 44 different cities in Tennessee where our students are from, 52 different undergraduate schools. Channel 5 was nice enough before graduation to do a story about two of our grads who didn't know each other. They're both from Chattanooga. And they met at orientation up here, and they decided that they would carpool. They've been carpooling back and forth from Chattanooga. They got their degree a couple of weeks ago, but they put 60,000 miles on their car, driving back and forth.
They had their own little study group.
They did. Back and forth. That's what they did. And And that's the wonderful thing. I mean, I'll hand out the diploma as they cross the stage, and they'll say something like 60,000 miles or 37,000 miles. You know, they're focused and they're tenacious.
Tell me the teaching method. So it takes 4 years. Does the class stay together? I mean, they're going to the same classes with each other all the way through. Is that how it works?
They're going to the same classes all the way through for the required courses.
Okay.
And we have more required courses than most law schools. But we think it's important that every student take a course in every subject that's going to be tested on the bar exam.
Right.
And a lot of law schools don't. Like evidence is now an elective course in most schools. If you're going to be a lawyer trying cases, you know, you got to take evidence here. You got to take civil procedure here. So we have a lot of required courses, but we do give them opportunities to take elective courses. And those elective courses, then they get broken up. We have 3 trial practice courses. We've got Mark Fishburne teaching criminal trial practice, which is actually a hands-on, how to do it, where to stand, how to make your arguments. We've got Dan Barexa teaching a civil trial practice. And then we've got Lee Davies, former judge, now a senior judge with the Supreme Court, and Phil Smith, one of our domestic relations judges. They do a domestic course. Those are all electives. Now, students must take at least one of those in order to graduate, but many of them take a couple.
Yeah. Teaching method, do they still make everybody stand up and call on people, or is it different now than it was back?
It's still kind of like the paper chase.
Yeah. Okay.
There's briefing. You stand up. There's a little. It's not quite as hard edged as it was when you or I went to school. You know, the mission of our faculty is not to embarrass students, but they still have to stand up and they still have to recite, and that's in the required classes. Now in the electives, there's a lot more hands-on stuff. Like we have an elective course in negotiations, and that's taught by Sarah Fiegel with the Nashville Conflict Resolution Center. She's going to start teaching that this year, and that's going to be more of a practicum, hands-on, you know, rather than talking heads. Because the way people learn how to do things is to do them. So that's what we try to do.
I think that's great. Sarah's actually on this call, so she's listening to you.
Oh, she is. Oh, good.
Yeah, she's there. I was going to tell you that that old teaching method. I had Jim Blumstein for torts in my second semester, and I felt like if I could survive that and survive him, then I could probably get all the way through.
There you are.
I made it. Despite all that. But I see Professor Blumstein every so often, and have a good laugh about that every so often. Well, we have a couple minutes left. Probably have 2 more questions. One regarding the law school, and then just one overall. An interesting story about the law school. Something that would make people go, you know what? That's really, really cool. I love the story that Channel 5 did. I think that's great. Something else that you would want to tell people who are just who go, what's something interesting about the school?
Well, another hat that I wear is a officer in an organization called the American Inns of Court, whose purpose in life is to promote excellent civility and professionalism in the practice of law. And it's got roots in England and the United States. It's actually started by the United States Supreme Court, and they're very supportive of it. And so I've been lucky enough to be involved in that. And I guess 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a dinner at the Supreme Court in Washington, and I just mentioned to Chief Justice Roberts, I said, why don't you come down and visit the school sometime? And he said, well, I'd like to do that. And I said, well, I need to tell you, it's not accredited by the ABA. He says, I don't care. So I said, well, great. Why don't we work it out? So it turned over to his staff, and we started getting a date. And then I was talking to the Chief Justice, and I said, there's 3 law schools in Nashville. We got Belmont and Vanderbilt. You could get 3 for 1. Do you want a joint program? And he said, sure. I'll be happy to do that. So got Al Gonzalez and Chris Guthrie, and we worked on a joint program where he was going to come for 2 days and go to 3 law schools. A week before he was scheduled to come, the impeachment started. And so he was going to have to preside. So he had to cancel one of the days. And so I get this call saying, I'm just not going to be able to make it, but I'll reschedule. And so he ended up coming down to Belmont and then turning around and flying back to Washington. And so there were some folks that were figuring, well, he's just saying he'll come back, but that you're not going to catch him again. A week later, his staff calls back and says, what are the dates we're going to have for his coming back? Because he promised he's going to be there and he wants to come. So we worked that out again. So he's coming back. But his deal was, he said, I don't want anybody at the school to know I'm coming. I don't want any media. I want to be able to talk to students and not worry about, getting misinterpreted. I just want a personal relationship with them. I said, fine. And so one Monday night, the Chief Justice shows up. He doesn't travel with a phalanx of people. He showed up with the judge who's now the Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. And he came in, and so we went from class to class completely unannounced. We opened the door like they were in the middle of a contract selection with Bill Harbison, and in walks the Chief Justice. Everybody's jaw drops to the ground. And Bill says, well, we have a few minutes, Mr. Chief Justice, if you have some things you want to talk about. So he talked to every class. He answered every question that they asked him, and they got questions, legal questions. But then I remember one student, I think she was a 3L. She said, Chief Justice, I'm a working mother. I've got 2 kids. I'm going to school. I know it's important to network, but how can I network professionally when I've got all these schedule commitments? And he just looked at her and he said, you're networking already. You don't worry about that. You'll take care of that when you graduate. Don't overburden yourself with things like that. Just focus on your work. So he was realistic. He was down to earth. He cracked jokes. And of course, there were a number of students who they didn't know he was coming, so they had cut class that night. And the next day, what I'm getting is angry emails from students saying, why didn't you tell us the Chief Justice was going to be there? And I emailed back and said, why weren't you in class?
Yeah.
So, that's the sort of things we try to do. That's the enrichment thing. But Chief Justice Roberts spent the night at our school.
Well, I think that's an amazing story. And maybe you answered my second question. And that was going to be about how do we, in such a divided nation with all the political battles, and particularly now the Supreme Court in the news, obviously quite a bit, is there hope that somehow we can figure out ways to get along? I love the fact that the Chief Justice came in unannounced and just talked to people like they were just regular folks. I think that's amazing.
I just give you a quick answer, and it's a Southern thing I've heard before, but I think part of the answer to our current impasse is to always recognize that the good Lord gave us 1 mouth and 2 ears. And the fact that we got 2 ears may be a signal that we need to listen more than talk. And I really fear that we're losing the ability to listen to the other side. And it's kind of as Howard Baker always used to say, he'd say, look, I'm going to listen to the other guy because he might be right. And I think that's the thing that we need to put front and foremost right now.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Judge, Dean, Bill, Koch, this has been so interesting. What interesting stories. I so much appreciate what you're doing at the School of Law. You've had a tremendous career doing all kinds of interesting things. I just appreciate the fact that you're willing to spend an hour this morning talking to us about it.
Well, just thank you for inviting me. I was delighted to do it. Well,
thank you so much. I will tell you that next week we will have Kelly Flannery call. Kelly is our budget director for Metro. And just really quick, what you need to know is that The Metro Council had their public hearing on the budget on Tuesday night. We will be meeting. We always have typically a special meeting between the first and third Tuesdays in June to pick up the capital improvements budget. And then a week from Tuesday, the council will be meeting to hopefully adopt the operating budget for fiscal year 2023. So Kelly will be on next week and we'll just be talking about the budget. So always interesting stuff going on. Again, Bill, thank you for spending the time this morning. Very much appreciate it. And tell Debbie hello and tell her thank you for letting us have you for an hour to talk about all these things.
I will. Thank you so much and have a good day, Jim.
All right. You all stay well. Everybody have a good weekend. Thanks.